Hello and welcome to our Bible study. This is a break in the series we've been doing studying the book of Acts, but I hope you enjoy it. This is called The Question of Life After Death. This is not the ultimate word, not the final word with everything you'd ever want to know, but I think it's maybe some interesting ideas and thoughts from the Bible, from the larger theological community, and from other sources as well, including scientific sources. Okay, so the topic of life after death is probably of great interest to almost everyone. Is there life beyond physical death? Our faith says there is. In fact, our faith assumes that there is, and most religions agree. The matter of the continuation of life or even birth into a new life following this physical one has been at the heart of much of religious faith for human beings for thousands of years, from the early Egyptians to our present day. The question certainly is an important part of Christian faith. What about life after death? What do we know about it? What do we believe about it? What does the Bible say? And finally, what do the answers to these questions mean for us and for our lives? So what does the Bible say? Well, in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible mostly, there was a clear belief that physical death was the end of physical life. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That what came next was kind of a shadowy existence called Sheol or Sheol. The New Testament epistles, including letters from Paul, reflected a fairly new Jewish and early Christian belief that resurrection would follow death, that there would be a continuation of personality and memory, that there would also be some accountability for how people have lived in this life. In the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians, Paul accepted this idea of resurrection and also of judgment. The early Christian churches fully expected Jesus to return to bring an end to the age, an end to all of existence, and to come pretty quickly, fairly short order. Because Jesus was resurrected after his death on the cross, they believed that the process of the kingdom's coming and the final judgment of people had already begun to take place. They believed that Jesus was the first fruits, the initial manifestation of this apocalyptic event. So Paul was trying to reassure the Corinthian Christians about how everything would be, mostly that they would be safe and secure because of their faith in Jesus, whether they had died by that time or were still living at the end of the age. In what's perhaps the most thorough attempt to describe the nature of life after death and resurrection, along with what was written, of course, in Revelation, though that is a highly dramatic apocalyptic vision designed to reassure people that God would take care of them. Paul assured them that everyone in the resurrection would indeed have a body, that there would be a bodily resurrection, but that body would not be flesh and blood, not physical, not organic, but a body, a form appropriate to spiritual existence in the same way that our physical bodies are appropriate for physical existence. The physical body grows, but then it deteriorates and dies. The spiritual body, however, grows and does not die, at least once resurrection happens. We need not fear a second death because our spiritual body bears the image of Jesus, the risen Christ. Just what that body looks like and feels like, Paul didn't say. I'm sure he really didn't know, didn't have a clue. It's an exciting idea to think about, but one will have to postpone for another time, that particular aspect of the question. Most of the New Testament says about life after death, including Jesus' teachings, uses the ideas of life after death and resurrection and judgment to teach people how to behave in this life. It's an image, a backdrop designed to focus on how we live our lives now. Some of the most well-known of these teachings include the story in Matthew 25 of the Last Judgment, with all people pictured as either sheep or goats, and the criterion for judgment being how they treated Christ in the least of these, those who were hungry, thirsty, homeless, etc. Another familiar story is about a rich man, Dives, and a beggar, Lazarus. In life, the rich man had all the power and comforts, the poor man suffered, but in the resurrection, their roles were reversed. They were switched. And the lesson for the rich man is that he should have noticed the poor man in this life and helped alleviate his suffering. In this story, the rich man has no more time, no more chance to change, and his brothers who were still alive were probably past the point of changing. We ask the question, what does the Bible tell us about life after death? So the New Testament tells us that resurrection after death is real. It might be all at once at the end of the age. In that case, when we die, we will rest unaware until the call comes. Regardless of the timing, though, there is accountability. These lives we live are not ours. They're given to us in stewardship, and the measure of our stewardship is faith in Christ, demonstrated by how we teach others, how we serve others, especially those in need. So Jesus taught what we need to grow as spiritual beings. He said, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. You can only do that if God's Spirit is in you. If someone hits you, don't return violence for violence and give beyond what seems reasonable. Learn to love and serve for the sake of others. Learn the gift of being merciful, not being judgmental. But always practice the wisdom of being discerning. The key to act like this is to have this attitude, not to score points with God, but because the nature of Jesus is growing within you. That's why we're here. That's why God has entrusted life to us, so that we can grow spiritually, just like we've grown physically. Now, there was a change in Jewish belief about life after death in the 2 or 3 or 4 centuries before Jesus. Babylonian and then Persian, then Greek conquests left their influence on Jewish thought, in particular around the question of what follows this earthly physical life. Virtually overnight, images of the afterlife changed from dead is just dead for everyone to the potential of a spiritual existence that could be great, could be called paradise, or a new Garden of Eden, or even the bosom of Abraham. This idea became a positive, energizing image for the blessed, for those who lived faithfully and acted toward others with compassion. There was the possibility of a continuing active personality, a lively awareness with personal interchanges. There was beauty and delight, new excitement, consequences. Also, excitement about the possibilities, but also an excitement that was transmitted to young Christianity. Eventually, this hope and excitement about paradise for the blessed became accompanied by a fear of punishment, consequences for bad behavior. There was the possibility of not being part of God's heaven and eternity. Centuries later, at the beginning of the 14th century, around 1300, Dante Alighieri of Florence, Italy, wrote a modern allegorical epic poem called The Divine Comedy. Dante's ideas were so innovative and so striking that many consider them a new revelation of the divine. They certainly have influenced how we think about the graphic torments of hell, the creative punishments of purgatory, and the idea of the spiritual realm as a journey that can lead us through levels of heaven until finally we are one with God. Throughout history, there have been people with an ability to connect to the realm of spirit. We all seek that connection through prayer. The Bible depicts King Saul, 1 Samuel 28, consulting with a medium. Through what we'd have to call a seance, she put him in touch with the spirit of the prophet Samuel. Samuel was not very happy about being disturbed, and Saul did not like the answers that he got, but he believed they were true. In the New Testament, Jesus spent time with the spirits of 2 ancient historical figures of the Jewish tradition, Moses and Elijah. They met with Jesus on the mountain of Transfiguration. In our own time, there are many people who have had experiences that can only be described as otherworldly. Countless unnamed people who felt the presence or sensed the communication from, or have even sought out communication with, or been sought out by a loved one who had died. There have been towering figures in the field of scholarship and science who've actually manifested or researched the many millions of experiences that seem to indicate what we might call the persistence of personality and the immortality of the soul. They seem to give strong testimony of the continuation of life after physical death. William James was, along with Sigmund Freud, one of the founders of modern psychological thought. James gave a series of lectures at the University of Edinburgh to a group of pretty hard-bitten scholars at the beginning of the 20th century about the value of primary religious experience. Primary religious experience is religion based on connecting with God more directly rather than religion based on books and traditions. He knew that life continued after death. Frederick Myers had been a Cambridge University professor of languages. He died in 1901, and 20 years later, after his death, he communicated through a couple of different mediums who used the techniques of automatic writing. He addressed the issue of what the spirit realm was like. Myers, 20 years after his physical death, revealed through mediums 7 stages of life. Stage 1 is the earthly plane in which we are currently living. Stage 2 is the experience immediately after death. There's a brief phase of adjustment, somewhat like the experience of a newborn baby who takes some time to adjust to this physical realm, spends a lot of time sleeping and dreaming and resting. Stage 3 is a more permanent spirit realm, a world of thought in which thoughts are the creative medium. One's thoughts translate directly into the reality, like shaping your world with your imagination. Otherwise, a world that feels a bit like this physical one. Stage 4, a decision must be made to move from stage 3 to stage 4, which begins a process a little less like the familiar worlds of our previous lives. As in the previous stages, the important work of stage 4 is to gain greater awareness of the creation itself, greater sensitivity to how things are. Beyond stage 4, there's nothing we can know other than the process of drawing closer to God, to the source of life and all joy. Now, all this is intriguing to me, but I just don't know about the particulars. It jives with my faith in that it affirms life after death, that there is a continuation or perhaps a new birth of life with a continuation of our personalities, probably of our memories and our sense of significant relationships. The idea of judgment, of accountability, certainly requires that we have our memories and a sense of ourselves after death. I really agree with the idea and believe deeply that life in the realm of spirit is not static. Even to the extent that we may live an existence that is not in time and space the way we've come to know it, I believe that we have a purpose for our existence. We'll have to work to do what reflects the values of God, the values that Christ taught, and the joy of coming to know even as we have been known. So, pulling it together in some way, shape, or form, my summary of all this is Jesus and others taught things like love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If someone hits you, don't return violence for violence. Give beyond what seems reasonable. Learn to love and serve for the sake of others. Learn the gift of being merciful, not of being judgmental, but always practice the wisdom of being discerning, which is a different kind of judging. The key to act like this, to have this attitude, not in order to score points with God, but to do this because the nature of God is growing within you. That's why we're here. That's why God has entrusted life to us, so that we can grow spiritually, just like we've grown physically. It's probably not necessary to think about or speculate about what life will be like after we die. It's enough to live our lives by the values that Jesus taught and seek to have the Spirit of God living in us more and more, to be taking on the mind of Christ to guide our attitudes and our actions. It's enough to seek to be like Jesus each day. Spiritual growth is growth in the Spirit of God, literally letting the Spirit grow in you, encouraging that growth. Spiritual growth is eternal growth. It's the type of growth and maturation, the kind of nature we'll need in order to live in heaven, just as it's the kind of nature we need to experience heaven here and now. So may God bless each of you today and each day on your life's journey and on this journey we share together. Amen. Take care.